Can everyone hear me? Yeah. I just want to say thank you for your talk. It's really beautiful, and you're doing a lot of work and labor in your talk too, covering a whole lot of different fields, bringing in both different scholars, contemporary artists. So I just appreciate the breadth of what you're holding. I want to say thank you for that. And it's kind of also corresponds to my question a little bit. And in thinking through the ways that you're offering both null value, but also the crossroads as a kind of digital practice, I'm curious how things like exhaustion and endurance come up in the work. Both what it means to like physically be exhausted doing the work, but also what it means to be exhausted to kind of complete something or think about completing something. And then the exhaustive use of particularly the ways that Black lives become enumerated in the kind of data sets that you're speaking to. So if you could both speak to kind of the exhaustion and then also what it means to like endure that within the ways that you're considering the crossroads.
Thank you. That's actually a really great question. And thank you for the sentiment. I appreciate that, for the witnessing there. This is a really great question because what I do want to point to in thinking about a crossroads praxis is both the crossroads as a gateway between living and the dead and the role that mourning and grappling with the dead plays, particularly in like Black life and thought. But I also want to point to the ways that actually has had a devastating role in people's lives, but also has had a healing role. The refusal to acknowledge a separation between those realms, the ways of honoring and witnessing, even in the wake of devastating news, devastating media treatment, centuries of knowledge in an archive that says over and over that your body is commodified, your body is a product, your body is a thing, and I think that sort of willingness to kind of bridge those worlds has been part of how Black communities have been able to endure. So enduring the exhaustion of this data, of this particular archive, I think is not possible without also attending to the flesh and blood, attending to the spirit, and attending to the human. As an example, I played you guys Pov Piti first, and I try not to be all in your business because I'm like, it's a private moment. Listen to your thing how you want to listen to it. But you guys had some feelings. You had some faces, and then I played Vessels, and people kind of like loosened up a little bit. And it was subtle, and it wasn't everybody, and that's fine. I mean, people's reactions to these sound is their own reaction. But that's sort of what Vessels is trying to do. It's trying to evoke a space of healing even in the midst of enclosure. And that's what Coin and Pov Piti were trying to do. Matana Roberts did that track. It was either weeks or months in the wake of her mother's passing. So she's doing this track that is both evoking the experience of the slave ship for this woman / girl, the experience of mourning her mother in the yellow fever, her experience of mourning, all of that is also happening. And so these things I think can be held together, but they both have to be held together and be part of that. And that also goes for scholars who are in slavery's archive, that overexposure is quite intense, and that grappling has to come with the flesh and blood and the people. So for those who are in similar archives, whether it's genocide, whether it's crisis, whether it's undocumented archives, whether it's dispossession, whatever it may be, whatever your subjects, however they're configured, and plus, if you are also a member of that community, then I think it becomes important the ways that you gird yourself in encountering that data and in dealing with these projects, but also how are you presenting that for your users? How are you presenting that for those who then will engage your project, who also, how are you attuned to that, to the reality that for some these paths are not paths, and for some this data is not simply binary code. So it's a template and model for I think all of us. Yeah. So thank you. That's a great question.
Hello. I also want to repeat thank you very much. This has been phenomenal, and it's gotten me thinking that the word endure just came up again. And I work a lot at the forefronts of technology, as many of the people do in the room. And with all of those forefronts, there's always like an elitism that goes to pretty much the majority or the controlling class. And it seems like all the marginalized populations have to endure first and then figure out a means of catching up. And I'm really, really interested because we have these talks about data predictive modeling and all that now, and as data becomes more relevant, we already see this trend happening again and again and again, that we're fighting all of the things that have been pre-built. How does a community get ahead and be the impetus and get credit at the start and not have to catch up? Do you mind if I ask that?
Sure. So one of the things that, when I think about a crossroads praxis, one of the parts and the prongs of the crossroad is not just a sort of attending to like this line between the living and the dead, which I think is important way of thinking about the world, important knowledge, but also attending to those who have done work already and have done work before. So in the context in which I do my work and in my particular archive, I'm always trying to gesture to folks like Du Bois, like Woodson, who really like in their day didn't even get their due. And that may be surprising for some people to hear, considering how much we hear about Du Bois, maybe even less Woodson, who is the father of Black History Month. But it's important to sort of acknowledge, I think, when thinking about a crossroads praxis, those who have done the work and been doing the work and perhaps are not surfaced by the algorithms, we can call them algorithms, I guess, or by the systems and structures that have turned in other directions to elite institutions versus an HBCU, to white scholars, not Black scholars doing Black history. So I would sort of, I'm always sort of like thinking about that, like, you know, if I'm thinking like, oh, a thing hasn't been done, then I'm kind of wondering, okay, has it not been done? Or has somebody done it before, and where can I draw on their skills and data and skills and data? But I'm also sort of really want to be attuned to the different ways of imagining what success is, what excellence is, what the next world is, what the rubric for getting ahead is. And I think that perhaps, for me, I look back at the history of slavery, but that's totally just me, to think about what kind of rubrics were enslaved people creating when they were imagining freedom. That's what my book is about, Wicked Flesh. Like, what are the rubrics that Black women are creating in the 18th century that actually put a whole lie to how we think of freedom today? And I think we could, you know, are we brave enough to do that? Like here today, like, are we brave enough to imagine that there are other ways of getting ahead? There are other rubrics and possibilities for what we want to have or can imagine as possible. And I think we will have to, especially with Shannon, your talk had people devastated. Thinking about something like as huge as the climate crisis. I mean, there's a lot of ways that we tackle data, those of us who do, because it's so big, and it really is often too big for the human mind to comprehend on its own. Got it. But that also means, like, if we're tackling something devastating, like the climate crisis, like the archive of slavery, it can be so overwhelming. So then, you know, can we then use the praxis of not people gone long before, in my case, people gone long before, to confront the apocalyptic devastation of something like the slave trade? What are the ways that people survive? And sometimes those will look very different. They might look small or local. They may be sustainable. They may be, you know, Catalina throwing some young boy under the bus so that she and her daughter can get free. I mean, there's sometimes ways that they don't look like how we thought they might look. But I think that might be some of might be some of the terrain that we can get to try and answer the great question that you pose. Like, how do we do this today? We maybe have to think different. Not to quote Apple, because that's weird, but we might have to think very different.
So much. We are running a little bit behind, so I hope we can continue the conversation in just a minute over some delicious food. And so everyone, please join me in thanking Jessica Marie Johnson for just an incredible talk. We are so grateful to have you. Thank you.